On today's episode of the Regression to the Mean podcast, we have our 6 players that we can't stop drafting. I'm your host, Sean Moran, and I am joined by my co-host, good friend, and fellow knower of ball, Keegan Thompson. Keegan, first guy we're going to start things off with, someone that I wanted to highlight. He is my highest drafted wide receiver. Across 70 drafts, I have 18% exposure to him. It's none other than the electric rookie out of LSU, Malik Nabers. What do you think about Malik Nabers, Keegan?
I love this. I love this being not only one of your most drafted players, but I just love Malik Nabers in best ball. I think the upside of rookie wide receivers is such a real thing, especially when you get in the back half of the year. But
yeah,
low target competition, like if any at all. And if you think about it, like we spent all offseason debating who's the better wide receiver prospect, Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison. Where's Marvin Harrison going in drafts?
12.
You're picking him 12, 13, 14, 15 if you're lucky. And so you're getting a third round draft ADP on Malik Nabers. I love that.
Yeah, the way I think of it is I want to draft dudes that this time next year are going to be going higher in drafts than they were the year before. And when I close my eyes and I imagine where Nabers could be going next year, I don't think it's a stretch to think he's in the top 12 or like the top 15. The way that I'm envisioning this is basically Garrett Wilson's rookie season, but hopefully more efficient, because I don't think the situation in New York, I don't think it's that bad. Like, he has minimal target competition. I think he waltzes easily into a 30% target share. I think Brian Dable's a great OC. Like, he won a road playoff game with Danny Dimes throwing for 300 plus yards to Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton. And, you know, Danny Dimes isn't very good, but he's capable of throwing it over the middle of the field. And I imagine Malik Nabers is going to play in the slot, have a super high first read target share, get layup targets, and hopefully break a few touchdowns, be a big play guy. And you already mentioned it. I love that he's a rookie too. We want, rookie wide receivers tend to finish strong, and I want some of that end of season production when it matters the most. And this is probably the cheapest we can get Nabers for the next 3 to 5 years. And I want all of them that I can get in the third round. Like, if you were looking at this though, like, what would prevent Nabers from being a bust? How does this burn me, do you think?
I think the only way it burns you is the quarterback position. Like, Danny Dimes would have to be like hurt most of the year, because I don't think if Danny plays the full season, like, you can get burned by Malik Nabers, or like maybe Malik gets injured. But if they have to go through some type of QB carousel, I feel like that could be bad for Malik Nabers. But I don't know that there are many paths to him being at like the very least worse than wide receiver 2 in fantasy. Like, if he's not a wide receiver 1, I could see that happening, but him being a wide receiver 2 at this ADP is totally fine. But you would need like a serious quarterback issue to really affect Malik Nabers. Like you already mentioned, his target share is going to be outrageous. He's not just going to line up in the slot. He's going to play all over the field for them. He's going to get manufactured touches because he's good with the ball in his hand. So I think it would take something pretty dramatic for him to not hit, especially at that ADP. I mean, if you look at the downside case for Marvin Harrison, like, you're expecting him to be a top 12 player in fantasy, not just top 12 wide receiver, top 12 player in fantasy at that ADP. Everything has to go right for him.
Yeah, Malik Nabers' current ADP 27th overall, and he's the current wide receiver 19. I think he has the type of upside to put up a top 12 season. The athleticism is pretty much second to none. It's like Jamar Chase level athlete. And I really want to see what his slot percentage is. If he comes out and he's just a layup target merchant in the slot and Dable's just running an absurd amount of first read targets through him, I think he could even hit home with Drew Lock. Like, honestly, I think I love Harrison as a prospect. I think he's more refined and does more difficult things than Nabers did in college in terms of how he could win outside as an X. But man, Nabers in the slot, dude. It's giving me OBJ vibes a little bit. So I'm all in on Nabers, and I'm going to continue to draft him at will, especially at that ADP. But before we get to our next guys, 2 things. If you are part of the 70% of people who are watching this video that have not yet subscribed to the Regression to the Mean podcast, you know what to do. Like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the notifications to make sure you aren't missing any of the content that we are dropping weekly. And 2, if you love fantasy football and you want to compete for a chance at $1.5 million, you need to be drafting on Underdog this summer. If you download the app and sign up using promo code RTM, the good people over at Underdog will double your deposit up to $100. Drafting on Underdog is my personal favorite way to get prepped and ready for my home leagues, will also allow me to compete in a ton of different contests for big cash prizes. Also having some fun. Promo code RTM. we will double your deposit up to $100. Okay, moving on to our next guy here. We have the RB2 on an explosive offense. He's going 75th overall, and he is the running back 17. You have 21% exposure to this running back. Tell us why you're in on David Montgomery this year in best ball.
Yeah, 21% David Montgomery through about 42 drafts I'm standing at right now. I feel pretty good about that as well, too. If I just think of last year, like 13 touchdowns, goes for 1K yards. The offense in Detroit remains the same schematically. The weapons are the same. Like there's no reason for me to think like Dave Montgomery's going to get pushed out by Jahmyr Gibbs. They're different running backs. They're different archetypes. And I think Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs can both play and succeed. We saw it last year. I know Gibbs is a rookie and we'll see him get more workload, but I think that team is, I'm not going to call it void of weapons would be the wrong thing, but they are very top heavy in where the weapons sit, right?
Yeah.
Like we're all curious what's going to happen with Jameson Williams, but we know who Amon-Ra is. We know what Sam Laporta is, and we know who their two running backs are, and we know who Jared Goff is. Like the offense will run through that 5 personnel right there. Ball can't go to Amon-Ra every time. Ball can't go to Sam Laporta every time. Jameson Williams right now is kind of a big play merchant. Hopefully his role expands, but I think the safest bet in this offense for me is the running backs. And 13 touchdowns last year is not something to just like ignore, right? I mean, the offense was great. I can expect it to be great again. And if you miss out on Gibbs in the first round, and maybe you've drafted a CMC, or maybe you're building teams around Ayuk or Debo, and you want to get that SF like Detroit correlation for week 17, David Montgomery is a great draft pick, especially in that range too. If you want to go 0 RB, or maybe you built out a hero, like I mentioned with CMC, like Montgomery has been a very common second running back that I've drafted. And like his ADP's what, 75 right now?
75th overall.
Yep. So like you've gotten through sufficient, you could, build out one running back, 4 wide receivers. Next pick is Dave Montgomery. And like you're looking at a loaded first 6 picks in underdog best ball drafts. So
yeah, I think he's a great best ball pick. I think it's a little bit tougher in redraft because I just don't know when his spike weeks are going to occur.
Yeah, you hate playing that game, right? When you have 2 good running backs in redraft. Like, I don't know how much David Montgomery I'll draft this year. I did it a lot last year in my redraft leagues because rookie running backs, you got to earn the trust of the coaching staff. He's been a veteran. He's been a good running back his entire career. I love him in best ball because they might trade off weeks. And I don't want to play the game of having to know what week is going to be the DMont week, but you don't have to do that on underdog.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of best ball.
You've got the injury contingent upside if Gibbs is going to get hurt. He's a great pick in a 0 RB build. I find myself taking Montgomery in 0 RB builds. I think I'm at market or a little bit above market with David Montgomery. I feel like I don't take a ton of them, but yes, I take him in San Francisco and Detroit builds. I feel comfortable that he's going to be safe at the ADP drafts, and he has upside if anything happens to Gibbs. It's total meat and potatoes pick, in my opinion. I'm just so high on Gibbs outright taking this role that it worries me a bit. And Gibbs did get a ton of goal line touches towards the end of the season, and he did fine with those opportunities. But then you look at the playoffs, Monty did get more touches. It's hard to predict. I think I'd rather bet on Gibbs, but if you miss out on Gibbs and you're on the clock in a 0 RB build, like it's pretty hard to do worse than David Montgomery. Like he's a steady Eddie type pick.
Yeah, the cost conversation is huge when I'm thinking about Montgomery versus Gibbs. Like, obviously, I love Gibbs. We hyped him up a ton last year. He's one of our favorite players, especially in fantasy football. But when I just incorporate cost into like where I'm drafting running backs, David Montgomery seems like a no-brainer for me.
Meat and potatoes, eat your vegetables. You got to get your macronutrients.
Establish the fuck out of it. Yeah, it's pretty easy bet for me.
This next one, he is the 126th player off the board. He is the RB39. He is my most drafted player at 23% exposure. I went through kind of the 5 stages of grief last night after some of my favorite analysts, Pat Crane and Davis Maddock, over at ADP Chasing, just absolutely ripped him a new one and said he was one of the worst picks on the board. I was texting Keegan several times, just like, did I make this mistake? And I'm like Charlie Day going through the whole entire Browns offense last year. And the player
is Pepe Sylvia.
Yeah, the player that I'm talking about is Jerome Ford, the running back for the Cleveland Browns. And here's my case on why I like Ford. So he was pretty middle of the pack in terms of efficiency and usage last season. But man, when I was telling you this, like that Browns offense was a borderline wasteland of fantasy production until Joe Flacco came in and threw the ball 277 times in 6 games. 277 times in 6 games, which is fucking nuts. He still finished as the RB 17.5 point PPR, and he's currently going at the RB 39. So even in kind of a dysfunctional offense, he did produce and had some spike weeks. I think the floor this season is relatively safe, and I think his role is locked in considering the comments that Stefanski has had about Ford. When he was asked about the running back room, he said, hopefully Nick Chubb gets better. The first guy he named was Jerome Ford and basically said he had some huge plays for us. He sounded pretty locked in on Ford. It wasn't just normal coach speak. But again, for Jerome Ford to win me a lot of money this offseason and for him to be a big winner, I think a few things probably have to happen. One, Nick Chubb has to sit for most of the year, pretty much all the year. Dante Foreman replaces Kareem Hunt in the Browns offense, but doesn't expand his role beyond that. Like if it was like 60-40 Ford Hunt. If this becomes a 50-50 or 55-45 type thing where Foreman's the lead back. By the way, you should be drafting Foreman if you're not, but he's a great pick as well. The Browns offensive line needs to stay healthy, unlike last year. They lost 3 really high-performing tackles to ACL injuries last year. And last, Deshaun Watson, he needs to rebound, or if he doesn't rebound, he swiftly needs to be replaced by Jameis Winston, right?
Yes.
One
Which
of those
could be
things,
a problem for Jerome Ford.
Yes, because, Jameis Winston's fuck it, throw it down the field somewhere. He is not a check down Charlie. I think out of all of those, I feel pretty confident about Chubb. I know Chubb's making progress. He's running in a straight line. He's squatting 700
I really don't
pounds.
think he's going to play this year.
But
people might kill me over that because of the squat videos, but you can squat. It doesn't mean you can cut and run at full speed and play the way Nick Chubb likes to play. I just don't know if he's going to be on the field this year.
I'm not going to bet against Nick Chubb, like say the man can't do it because he's Nick fucking Chubb. Like the guy's already done it once, he blew out his knee in a very similar way in college, and it's basically had a borderline Hall of Fame career since coming in the NFL. I just want to go with historical precedent, and historical precedent shows that these guys don't come back next year off these injuries, and then when they do, they're usually not as effective. So I'm going to bet on Ford maintaining the lead back role in this offense, and I'm betting on this offensive line being a lot better. Dante Foreman's a bit of a dice roll. I think Dante Foreman's a good player. When you look at like rush yards over expected, success rate, he's quite good. Deuce Staley is the running back coach for the Browns next year. Deuce Staley was in Carolina when Foreman played pretty well, so there's some history there. So I think Foreman's going to have a role. I think draft Foreman and Ford. Definitely draft Foreman at the end of drafts. That's like stealing, in my opinion. But I don't know what to think about Watson, dude. I don't. He was so bad.
Yeah, I think all the other concerns you highlighted, like I think you can bet on the offensive line being healthy again. Like that's a pretty safe bet. Like offensive linemen recovering, it's not like skill positions, and them being more sound on the offensive line will just help in general overall for the offense. Foreman is a worry for sure, but I think Ford has earned his opportunity to like lead them in carries, and he's pretty good in like a lot of those like advanced rushing metrics. Not like good above average, but he's top 20 in like missed force tackles per attempt.
He's explosive. Yeah. He's explosive.
Yards after contact per attempt. He's a good runner. So I mean, like him. Also, only 4 touchdowns last year, and still had a decent year and a half.
5 receiving touchdowns though. He was nasty in the receiving game,
which is good. That's a great thing to have. So 9 total, but if he ups the rushing numbers, maybe maintain some of the passing work, I think it's all good. But yeah, you got to have Watson play well. And I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen.
He kind of feels like NFL Ben Simmons at this point. I don't know.
He's got a lot going on. He did a lot of fucked up shit.
Yeah.
He plays a role on top of also being broken and injured.
Yeah, he's like a sexual deviant. But yeah, it's a bit of a parlay with Jerome Ford. But when we saw this Browns offense click and they were healthy, he had that huge spike week against Pittsburgh when Chubb got hurt. And then he literally had a 25-point, half-point PPR showing in week 17 against the Jets. Like he went off on the ground through the air. So I think he's an explosive player. This offense should be better. I'm in on Jerome Ford, but there are a bit of concerns here for him at his ceiling, but I feel really good about his floor. Moving on to the next guy here. It's our first quarterback and our only quarterback. ADP of 177. He's QB 24. I have 16% exposure, the most drafted quarterback that I have. And by the way, for the YouTube comments, we're just going off of ADP order. So that's why I'm talking back to back. So don't yell at me for talking too much in the middle of this episode.
Don't get mad at Shaun for talking too much again. Yeah.
Okay, but again, more people probably should get mad at me for talking too much. But the player in question eats mayonnaise in his coffee, and he eats bananas whole. He is none other than Will Levis, he's kind of an electric factory in terms of, like, do I think he's good? Probably not. Do I think he's entertaining? Hell yeah. Do I think that the Titans are going to throw the piss out of the ball next year? I really do. So it doesn't really matter if Levis is good. What matters is the Titans have built a hell of an offense around him. They've got Nick Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd. That's a professional wide receiver core right there. They have Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, which is a fun duo. They've made some investments along the offensive line, drafting Pete Skoransky last year. Who'd they take? Jeremy Lamp. Who did they take? The kid from Bama. Who was the tackle they took?
J.C. Latham.
Yes, they took J.C. Latham. So they're building along that offensive line. They're investing a ton in that offense. So I really enjoy all that. And then I love the fact that they brought in an offensive-minded head coach who likes to play up tempo and throw the ball around the yard. I don't think any team is going to be more schematically different in 2024 than in 2023 than the Titans. It's going to look hell of a lot different without Mike Vrabel and the King Henry. I could not imagine a team be more different. And what's nice is he's probably going to play all 17 games. He's going to get a 17-game tryout to see if he's the future or not. And I think it's pretty similar to what Sam Howell was last season. Sam Howell was really fucking good in fantasy and was basically free. It sucks that he got benched at the end of the year, but man, those first 13 weeks were special. Hopefully we get that for a whole season of Will Levis. But at pick 177, QB 24, I want all of the Will Levis I can get. What are your thoughts? I know you say he's jacked, but does that mean he'll score fantasy points, Keegan?
I honestly love Will Levis. I feel like it's a really cheap quarterback, and also the pieces around him in underdog best ball drafts are really cheap. Like, I think Hopkins is undervalued on underdog. Yeah. I think Calvin Ridley's probably priced a little too high. I don't draft a lot of them. Obviously, there's Tyler Boyd, but like the signs point to Callahan just like establishing the fuck out of the pass, right? They brought in
establish the pass, baby.
Yeah,
establish
the pass. They bring in Tyler Boyd. They've got Calvin Ridley. They still have D-Hop. They have Chig, who we're big fans of. They have Chig. 2 running backs who can be specialists in the passing game, but also complement each other in the run game. And if I told you that Will Levis last year was the leader in the NFL with a minimum of 100 dropbacks and ADOT and also deep throw percentage, some people might be like, really? Like, I didn't know that. But yes, like Will Levis, ADOT last year, 10.5, deep throw percentage, 20.8%. So now
that's like, that's throwing the ball around the yard, folks. That's throwing the ball around the yard.
That's establishing the fuck out of the pass, all right? And
the whether they win games or
not, yeah. Whether they win games or not, I can't tell you that, but they will pass a lot and they will try and get it to their weapons. Like D-Hop was still surprisingly good last year. Like the age clip is not really a concern for me. He's not like a huge separator, but I still think he's really good at like fighting for contested catches.
Yeah.
And he's just a dog overall.
Yeah.
Calvin will be in, a unique opportunity where he's not going to be forced to do some of the stuff that he was in Jacksonville. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing how they leverage him. And then Tyler Boyd's like as steady Eddie as it gets when it comes to like having a big guy in the slot. And then dump offs to Tajay, dump offs to Tony Pollard. It sounds like a good recipe for fantasy points for Will Levis. And the thing is with Levis, like this is a really cheap quarterback in terms of ADP. You don't get maybe the same rushing upside, but fuck, he might just have like
in college
a couple 30 bombs.
He ran it in college. He was like the wildcat quarterback at Penn State. So like he has that athleticism in there. And he ran at Kentucky. So
I'm just saying you can't bank on that to add to his fantasy production, but you can bank on them at the very least throwing the hell out of the football.
And we know that Tony Pollard is a terrible red zone running back, so maybe Will Levis becomes their red zone rusher like that. We're cooking with gas there. And by the way, don't look up Levis's stats from last year. Don't do that. They're irrelevant because they were bad. They were really, really bad.
Big men throw deep.
Yeah, I remember. I was trying to make a case on why you should buy him in Dynasty. I don't know if I do that. I'd see if he's good first. But in an underdog best ball where he can take him as your QB2, your QB3 for basically free and stack him with an offense that I think will have a ton of volume, we're cooking with gas. Moving on to our next player here, we got 2 more. They are some of Keegan's highest drafted players. The next guy we have is a rookie out of Western Kentucky. He has an ADP of 180, and he is the wide receiver 79, so a bit of a deep cut here in drafts. Keegan's drafted him in 24% with 24% of exposure in his drafts here. Tell us why you're drafting Malachi Corley outside of the fact that you are a Homer Jets fan.
I took off the hat for this podcast so people couldn't come in here. I'm like, of course a Jets fan said that. Like, it does seem biased, but honestly, I don't have a lot of exposure to the Jets offense outside of Malachi Corley. And I think it's because, one, I'm building a lot of backdoor like correlation for Buffalo stacks for week 17. Like, Josh Allen, maybe I don't want to draft those weapons necessarily. Like, Keon's priced really high. Not a big Shakir guy. I feel like you can get away with like a Allen, Kincaid, and some Corley or Mike Williams in there, Samuel. So it's an easy way to build out that week 17. I think also the upside to if Mike Williams gets injured is huge. Not that they play the same role because it's very different. I feel like Malachi Corley is definitely going to get a slow start in his NFL career, so he gets mixed in, but they are void of weapons. Like, it is Garrett Wilson and it is Mike Williams, and you're betting on him to be healthy for a full season for the first time in how long? Like, that is, for me, uncomfortable as a Jets fan, but for me as a drafter of other pieces around their team, I want to try and get some contingent upside. If Aaron Rodgers is healthy, he's still only 3 years removed or 2 years removed from an MVP season, back-to-back years. I know Aaron Rodgers has it in him to get the ball to his playmakers, and he can be kind of a manufactured touch guy too. Like, we can do really quick gimmicky plays with Malachi Corley, and I think he showed a lot in college that he can make the most of those opportunities. And Brees and Garrett are our best weapons on offense outside of Aaron Rodgers. Like, he's going to be competing with Jason Brownlee, Xavier Gibson for some touches.
Who?
Exactly. So, and because even if Mike doesn't get injured, he does play a completely different role. I still like Conklin as a weapon for them, but
I did too.
Yeah, he's cheap. He's a good way to complete that week 17 correlation. He's tied to when healthy, a very elite quarterback, and people can get after me about the Nathaniel Hackett offense, but let's be real. This is Aaron Rodgers' offense, and it always was going to be. So he's going to be calling all the plays out there. It's tricky. He doesn't have like the best reputation getting rookies involved in an offense, but he's reawakened. He's had plenty of ayahuasca trips. He's changing the tide on who he is. So.
Plenty of ayahuasca, plenty of mulling VP runs. He's had plenty of that.
I'm curious, Shaun, because I know you are a big Corley guy coming out of college. So, like, what are your expectations for him, and like, how do you feel about him in best ball?
Well, I love the fact that you have potential end of season rookie breakout upside. Those last 6 weeks are usually huge for rookies.
Always something you like.
I want in on that. I think he's going to get schemed up touches in the pass game. So if he's good, he might get 3 layup targets per game that are just schemed up to him. He was a screen merchant in college. Like, it was kind of crazy how much production came off screens, but it wasn't necessarily fluky. Like, they ran the entire offense through him and his unique skills.
If it continues to work, is it fluky? Right?
I'm telling you, they ran that entire passing offense through him, and I think he had like a 5-yard ADOT. So that's a unique player. He really is a unique player. If Rodgers likes him, there shouldn't be any accuracy issues. Like, there shouldn't be quarterback issues. Like, I don't know if he's good, right? Like, that's what I fear, is that how good is he? How can he run routes? Because it was a pretty limited route tree. Harmon said there's a player in there that could be useful, but there really isn't anything on tape that indicates that he's running a full route tree. I know that he kind of comps favorably to Randall Cobb, like in terms of play style, size, speed. That's somebody he could maybe mature into, and Rodgers loved Randall Cobb. And of course, the yak ability with Corley is phenomenal. This guy has an ability to take a screen pass and break 6 tackles and go 40, 50 yards. I don't think he's a Deebo Samuel. I don't think anyone's Deebo Samuel. And the minute you start seeing people get comped to Deebo, that's almost like is this guy good? But I do think Malachi Corley could be a useful player. And even though I think Garrett Wilson's going to have a monster year, and the offense is going to run through him, I do think there is a role for Mike Williams. I do worry about the ACL, and I do worry about the age, but Mike Williams is a good player. But if I had to make a bet on who's the second pass catcher in this offense in the last 6 weeks of the year, I think it'd be Corley. So I want in on that. I worry if he's not good or not, but the Jets traded up for him, and the Jets have been pretty good at drafting players outside of Zach Wilson. So and just quarterbacks in general. Like Joe Douglas has drafted some pretty good players during this run. So
he's been all right. You know, the Mekhi Becton swing wasn't great, but I understand what he was going for there.
Those injuries. Like, I mean, what? He's drafted Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson. What other offensive guys has he drafted?
That's the problem is Robert Saleh drafts the defensive guys and Joe Douglas drafts the offensive guys. So, like, his hit rate, Joe, I think, is a little more skewed, whereas Roberts looks pretty fucking good, you know, with the Jermaine Johnson. Will McDonald is still waiting to see, but all terms of, like, from what I know, Malachi seemed like a very agreed upon pick. So I know they both really liked him. Yeah. So
he's a football guy. He's a football guy. It's whether or not he's a role player, like legit good at football is the question. But I wide receiver 79. I'm happy with that, especially in stacks. Like I want these rookie wide receivers in best ball. Last guy here. This one we're ending with is kind of insane. ADP of 187, RB 57. Keegan's exposure is 37%. This is like almost a Rondale Moore bit at this point for me last year, but Keegan's just hammering this running back here with 37% exposure. Tell us why you're all in on a guy that probably is running back 2 on his team, but could be running back 3. Why do you want to take a chance on Khalil Herbert at the end of drafts?
Yeah, you know, like I mentioned when we first started, I'm only through like 42 drafts. Like, Shaun, you will draft many more best ball teams than I will this summer. Like, I don't have the portfolio building accessibility that like some large players do. I will draft a lot of best ball teams before the season, but this is kind of just like a player take, believing in a pick that is right. Also, we're talking about ADP 180, right? Like, this is the back half of drafts. I'm completing my 0 RB builds, but the case for Khalil Herbert is I don't think DAndre Swift is very good, like, if at all. I think he's good at what he does specifically, like with the ball in his hands, he's pretty good. But as a pure runner, he's not what Khalil Herbert is. You know, as a goal line running back, he's just not that. I mean, if you look at what's happened every time he's left the team, they've gone and replaced DAndre Swift with somebody like DAndre Swift left the Lions and he got replaced immediately by David Montgomery. And he was super successful. Yeah. And Jahmyr Gibbs. He leaves the Eagles and they turn around and go get Saquon Barkley. Like, it's not like he's on his 3rd team already. The track record for Swift isn't great. I'm not trying to dog on Swift. I'm just saying this is my Khalil Herbert argument.
He's a pass catcher. Like, we all like DAndre Swift is at his best when he gets maybe 150 carries and a bunch of targets, and you use him in creative ways because he's super explosive. But I don't think he has that great of vision, and he's definitely not good at the goal line.
Yeah, and I think the downside to Khalil Herbert argument is, of course, there is the Roschon Johnson factor, who will enter into a 2nd year, who's good in pass pro, but there's just like
Swift. I think Roschon eats into Swift because I think Roschon can play on 3rd down, and if Swift's not on 3rd down, like, that's bad for Swift.
Yeah, it's a tricky bill. Like, you know, it's a tricky thing to navigate. There's 3 running back options here, but I'm making my bet. I've planted my flag. Like Mr. Mean, I've planted it fully. It might break, but I'm just committed. It's not even a bit. I just find myself like, oh, there's Khalil Herbert again. I've also built out a lot of Chicago, Seattle stacks, like in my best ball drafts. I love that Week 17 game. And if we're talking Week 17, if you actually get there to the Holy Grail, and I'm looking at who might be getting an opportunity to have goal line touches for the Bears in Week 17, do I think it's going to be Swift? I don't know about that. So I'm going to make a bet on who that is, and I think that could be Khalil Herbert. The issue with Herbert is, and it's not so much an issue, it's like I don't want to call him out for, he's a great pure runner, like very good pure runner, but he'd have to get more involved in the pass game for this to be like a massive best ball tilting league winning things. Exactly, right? So but the injury upside, we always talk about that when you're drafting players like in these later rounds, a contingent injury upside, who has a path to relevance if their top person gets hurt. And I think even if Swift got hurt and Roschon didn't, like Herbert and Roschon is plenty of touches for me personally to be comfortable with this bet I'm making on Herbert. And I don't think this is going to happen because Khalil Herbert's on the last year of his deal. They don't really have to get rid of him right now. But if he were for some reason to get traded to a team that's void of running back talent, which there are still options out there in the season, that's another out. I don't think that's going to happen, but
Dallas.
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 Yeah, I mean,
I don't think it'll happen.
That would. I don't think so either. But these are some of the things that go through my brain when I'm just like blindly clicking Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, I think he could be the odd man out because they just paid Swift and they just drafted Roschon Johnson with this administration, right? Administration. Shit, I've been reading
administration. I like
too
that,
much political news.
Jesus
Christ. So I do think if he were to get pushed out, if anyone were to get pushed out, I do think it makes sense. It could be him. I just think what makes Khalil Herbert a good pick at the end of drafts is that I'm desperately just trying to draft guys that are good players. And he's just a good player. Like the guy's just a really efficient runner. He's always at the top of the league in rush yards over expected and rushing efficiency. And he's been really good whenever he's gotten a bunch of carries in his career. Like, are you looking in the face?
Running back.
You're gonna tell me you look me in the face and say like Zamir White is better than Khalil Herbert? No, like Khalil Herbert just hasn't been given that.
That's a great point.
Like he just hasn't been given the keys. And his situation isn't great, right? They pay DAndre Swift a ton of money. They draft Roschon Johnson. I don't think he can pass block, and I don't think he's very good as a pass catcher, right? Which isn't great for Herbert. But I do think people are underestimating how much better Caleb Williams is going to be as a passer than Justin Fields. And I think DAndre Swift could do quite well with Caleb Williams, considering that Caleb Williams had a really good connection with Marshawn Lloyd, and I think Marshawn Lloyd and DAndre Swift are similar players. But I think Khalil Herbert could have a better pass-catching season than anticipated just because Caleb Williams is more willing to check it down, willing to extend plays, willing to, find the right guy. But I just think RB57, he's going behind guys like Jalen Wright, who's the third-string running back on the Dolphins, Bucky Irving, who is the backup, I guess. Like, I love Bucky Irving.
50 touches this year?
Come on. Like, I like Bucky Irving, but the guy's like he's tiny. He's very tiny. Antonio Gibson is like the second back in a really potentially bad offense. And if Drake May plays, Drake May is just going to run the ball anyways. He's not going to check it down a ton. Elijah Mitchell, who will not see the field if CMC's playing. Like, I get that's an injury, lottery
J.K.
ticket.
Dobbins is still getting drafted ahead of Khalil Herbert.
Stop it. Come on.
Ray Davis, Chuba Hubbard, Tyler Algier, Kamani Vidal.
So you could talk me into Vidal because Vidal could, be the starter. So there's upside there. Tyler Algier, I think, is going to maintain a role. I think that's a very comparable pick, in my opinion, Herbert and Algier. Dude, I just think like Herbert has the potential to be like in Seattle. Like if Kenneth Walker doesn't get hurt, I think Kenneth Walker gets like a 60-40 touch distribution, right, between him and Charbonnet. I think it could be something really similar with that in Chicago. Like there's a world where this is a timeshare and Herbert gets the highest value touches at the goal line. And Swift just has a fine role, but it's not that great of a role. Like we've seen Swift do this multiple times where it's like, he's just good inside the 20s. Like, okay, like that's not going to win.
I hope Aiden doesn't watch this particular part. If he does watch it, I'm sorry, Aiden, but yeah, I'm just kind of betting on DAndre Swift to suck.
All right, those are our 6 guys that we can't stop drafting. We've got Malik Nabers, we've got David Montgomery, Jerome Ford, Will Levis, Malachi Corley, Khalil Herbert. If you are still with us, subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. We're going to be dropping more draft content for Best Ball. We're still going to talk Dynasty, and oh baby, redraft season is just around the corner. Thanks for rocking with us, Keegan. Before we jump, anything you got to say to the listeners?
I hope that you're all treating your families and or significant others well as you're locking yourself in a room to play NCAA 25. Remember to drink water, check in on your family, and just remember it's just a video game. But I hope you all enjoy the new game. We've been waiting a long time for it.
Man, I don't think I'll ever see that game in the light of day. I would be so Jover for my my pending marriage if I was like, hey babe, after I record this podcast, after I record this podcast and then trade this meme coin, I'm gonna go play 3 hours of NCAA football.
Yeah, I gotta go lead San Jose State to the promised land. Babe. We'll see you in 4 hours.
Get ready to speak divorce, buddy. That's where I'm gonna be. But hope you have fun playing the game. Thank you, Brody, for tuning in. Until next time.